Tiny black twins beg Mountain Man for help. He instantly bursts into tears. That's what folks in Whetstone Hollow are whispering. But no one saw what those little girls carried in their hands, or what their voices stirred in that broken man's soul. He was a ghost in the mountains, grizzled, silent, dangerous. No one had seen him in years. Then came two tiny strangers, soaked to the bone, whispering a name only he remembers, and asking for help that could cost everything. Now the town's holding its breath, the railroad's closing in, and the man who vanished is suddenly walking through fire, not with a rifle, but with something far more dangerous, a second chance. Dust is rising, secrets are waking, and the past is about to dig its boots into the present. Who were those girls sent to find, and why did their cry crack open the hardest man in the West? Every time I see your comments, I'm reminded how stories connect us across distances, backgrounds, and hearts. If values like respect, courage, and compassion still guide you, then you're part of this story too. Thunder cracked across the Montana sky as Boaz McCrae's axe bit deep into another log. His weathered hands, marked by 67 years of frontier life, gripped the worn handle with practiced ease. Spring snow still draped the ridge like a white blanket, but the air felt heavy with the promise of rain. Dark clouds rolled over the Rockies, casting long shadows across his modest log cabin. The old scout paused, wiping sweat from his brow despite the chill. His joints ached more these days, especially when storms approached. Still, the woodpile needed tending, a solitary man's work that matched his solitary life. The rhythm of splitting wood had become a comfort over the years, helping to quiet the memories that haunted him. The first fat drops of rain began to fall as another rumble shook the mountains. Boaz gathered his split logs, intent on getting them under cover before the downpour proper began. That's when he heard it. A sound so faint he thought he'd imagined it at first. A knocking, soft but persistent, coming from his cabin door. Out here in the high country, visitors were rare as hen's teeth. Boaz set down his armload of wood and approached cautiously, one hand instinctively moving to the revolver at his hip. The knocking came again, somehow both timid and desperate. When he pulled open the heavy door, his heart nearly stopped. Two little girls stood huddled together on his threshold, their dark skin glistening with rain. They couldn't have been more than 6 years old, identical as two peas in a pod. Their feet were bare and mud-caked, their simple cotton dresses soaked through. One clutched a raggedy doll missing an eye, while the other held a worn Bible close to her chest as if it were pure gold. The slightly taller girl, though the difference was barely noticeable, stepped forward half an inch. Her voice quavered, but held firm as she said, "Mama said find the man with the crow tattoo." Boaz felt the blood drain from his face. With trembling fingers, he pulled back his left sleeve, revealing the faded ink he'd carried for decades. A black crow in flight, its wings spread wide across his forearm. The sight of it had brought him shame for so many years, but now it seemed to take on new meaning, as these two lost little ones stared up at him with eyes full of desperate hope. His knees gave out then, and he sank to the wooden floor as tears spilled down his weathered cheeks. The past he'd tried so hard to bury had found him at last, delivered by two angels in sodden clothes. "Lord have mercy," he whispered, his voice rough with emotion. Then, gathering his wits, he saw how the girls shivered. Come in quick now. You're frozen through." Boaz scooped them both up in his arms, their tiny bodies trembling against his chest. He kicked the door shut against the growing storm and carried them to the hearth, where embers still glowed from his morning fire. Setting them down gently, he wrapped each child in a thick buffalo hide he used as a winter blanket. "Stay right there, little ones," he said, already moving to stoke the fire. He added kindling and smaller logs until the flames danced high, casting warm light through the cabin's single room. From his meager stores, he pulled out cornbread left from breakfast and set a pot of beans to warm near the fire. The girls huddled together under their buffalo robes, watching his every move with wide, solemn eyes. When he offered them each a plate, their manners showed through their hunger. They waited until he nodded before eating and remembered to murmur, "Thank you, sir." "Might I know your names?" Boaz asked softly, once they'd taken the edge off their hunger. The bolder twin spoke first, her voice barely above a whisper. "I'm Addie Ellis." She nudged her sister gently. "Ada Ellis," came the even quieter response. Ada clutched her one-eyed doll closer, as if drawing courage from it. Boaz's heart clenched at the surname, Ellis. He'd known, from the moment they mentioned the tattoo, he'd known. But hearing it confirmed made it real. "And your mama," he said carefully. "Her name was Ruth?" Both girls nodded, their faces falling. Addie spoke again, her small shoulders straightening as if taking on a burden too heavy for her years. "Mama got sick 3 nights ago. She told us to wait till—" Her voice caught, but she pressed on. "Till she stopped breathing. Then we were supposed to find you. She said look for the cabin with the split pine out front, and the man with the crow tattoo would help us." The wind howled outside as if giving voice to Boaz's inner turmoil. Ruth Ellis. He hadn't heard that name spoken aloud in more than 20 years, but it had echoed in his conscience every day since. Ruth, who'd seen good in him when he'd lost sight of it himself. Ruth, who'd offered forgiveness he hadn't deserved. And now, Ruth was gone, sending her precious daughters to him of all people. Thunder boomed again, making both girls jump. Ada began to cry silently, tears tracking down her cheeks. Without thinking, Boaz reached out and gently wiped them away with his calloused thumb. "You're safe now," he said, his voice gruff with emotion. "Your mama, she was right to send you here." The words felt strange in his mouth, but he knew they were true. Whatever his past sins, whatever his unworthiness, Ruth had trusted him with her daughters' lives. He wouldn't fail that trust. The storm raged on outside, but inside the cabin, Boaz kept the fire well fed and warm. He watched as exhaustion slowly overcame the twins' fear and grief. Their small heads began to nod, even as they fought to keep their eyes open. He fashioned a bed for them near the hearth, using his own bedding and extra quilts to make a soft nest. As he tucked them in, Addie's grip on the Bible loosened enough for him to see what looked like papers sewn into its binding. The sight stirred something in his memory. Ruth had been clever about protecting important documents, but that was a mystery for another time. For now, these little ones needed rest. Boaz settled into his chair by the fire, prepared to keep watch through the night. His mind whirled with memories and questions, but one thing was clear. His life of solitude had ended the moment these 2 girls knocked on his door. Ruth's final act had been to entrust him with her most precious treasures, and in doing so, she'd given him something he'd thought forever lost, a chance at redemption. Gray dawn light crept through the cabin's single window, rousing Boaz from his vigil. During the night, Addie and Ada had migrated from their makeshift bed, curling up like kittens at his feet. His old bones had stiffened from sitting upright in the chair all night, but he couldn't bring himself to disturb their peaceful sleep. The fire had burned low, leaving only glowing embers. Moving with the careful quiet of a man used to living alone, Boaz added kindling and small logs until the flames caught again. He filled his iron pot with fresh water and set it to boil, then measured out oats from his storage barrel. A precious spoonful of honey would make the plain fare more appealing to little ones. As the porridge bubbled, soft rustling drew his attention. Ada sat up first, rubbing sleep from her eyes with tiny fists. Her movement woke Addie, who immediately reached for her sister's hand. The gesture spoke volumes about how they'd learned to face the world together. "Morning, little ones," Boaz said, keeping his voice gentle. "Breakfast is nearly ready." The girls watched him ladle steaming porridge into tin bowls, their eyes following his every move. When he drizzled honey over each portion, their faces lit up despite their lingering wariness. "Thank you, sir," they murmured in unison, accepting the bowls with careful hands. Boaz settled back in his chair, nursing a cup of coffee. As the children ate, he wrestled with the questions that had kept him awake all night. Finally, he asked, "Can you tell me how you found your way here?" Addie, ever the spokesperson, swallowed her mouthful of porridge before answering. "We walked from Dusty Bend, following the river like Mama showed us." Boaz's heart skipped. Dusty Bend. He knew that settlement. A community of Cherokee freedmen had established it after the war, 2 days' journey south of his cabin. Your mama showed you the way? Ada nodded. She took us walking lots of times, said we should know the path in case. Her voice faltered. In case anything happened to her, Addie finished, squeezing her sister's hand. Mama said look for the split pine tree and the man with the crow picture on his arm. She said you'd help us. Boaz's coffee cup trembled in his weathered hands. Ruth. Ruth Ellis had been alive all these years, living just 2 days away. The knowledge hit him like a physical blow. 20 years ago, during the chaos of Reconstruction, he'd been a Union scout when he'd pulled her from that burning camp. The memory of smoke and screams still haunted his dreams. He'd gotten her to safety, but in the confusion that followed, he'd lost track of her. All these years, he'd carried the weight of believing she'd perished like so many others. Your mama, he said carefully. She was a brave woman. I knew her. Long time ago. Both girls perked up at this, hunger momentarily forgotten. She said you helped her, Ada offered shyly. When there was bad fire. Boaz nodded, unable to speak past the lump in his throat. These innocent children couldn't know the full truth of that night, how his own actions had contributed to that bad fire. Ruth's forgiveness had been a grace he'd never felt worthy of receiving. After breakfast, Boaz heated more water. The girls needed proper washing after their long journey. He dragged out the wooden tub he used for his monthly baths, setting it near the fire. Finding soap and clean rags, he helped them bathe one at a time while the other sat wrapped in a buffalo hide. Their clothes were still damp and mud-stained from yesterday's storm. Boaz dug through his trunk until he found 2 old flannel shirts. With a few quick stitches, he converted them into makeshift dresses that swallowed the tiny girls in soft, warm fabric. The day passed in a blur of small tasks, feeding the chickens, tending the fire, answering the girls' quiet questions. As evening approached, exhaustion began to show in their drooping eyelids and slower movements. Boaz made up their bed again near the hearth, this time with extra quilts he'd found stored away. Once their breathing had settled into the deep rhythm of sleep, Boaz moved to the far corner of the cabin where an old carved trunk sat. His hands shook as he lifted the lid. Inside, beneath carefully folded clothes and memories he rarely disturbed, lay 2 items: a tarnished silver locket and a letter, its envelope yellow with age and still sealed. The letter had arrived 10 years ago. He recognized Ruth's careful handwriting on the envelope, but he'd been too deep in his guilt to open it. What right did he have to read words from a woman whose community he'd helped destroy? So he'd tucked it away with the locket, the one she'd pressed into his hands that terrible night, insisting he keep it safe until they met again. Now, watching the twins sleep peacefully by his fire, Boaz finally broke the seal. The paper crackled as he unfolded it, and Ruth's words, written a decade ago, reached across time to shake his world again. Dear Boaz, I pray this letter finds you. I've tried to write so many times over the years, but words failed me. Now I must write for my children's sake. Yes, I have twin daughters, beautiful and strong. They are my heart's joy and my greatest concern. Life is uncertain for our people, as you well know. If anything should happen to me, I name you their guardian. You may wonder at this choice, but I've never forgotten your kindness that night, nor your evident remorse for past wrongs. You helped me when others turned away. That crow on your arm marked you as one who saw the humanity in all people, even when it cost you dearly. I've shown the girls how to find you. They know to look for your cabin if they're ever alone. Please, Boaz, don't let your guilt keep you from helping them. You once asked how I could forgive you. This is my answer by trusting you with what I hold most precious. The girls carry my Bible. In its binding, you'll find papers proving their free status and my wishes for their care. Keep them safe, Boaz. Help them grow strong and kind in this hard world. With hope and trust, Ruth Ellis. The firelight cast dancing shadows on the cabin walls as Boaz sat in his worn leather chair, Ruth's letter trembling in his weathered hands. He'd read it so many times now the words were burning themselves into his memory. His eyes drifted to the sleeping forms of Addie and Ada, curled together like dormice near the hearth, their small chests rising and falling in perfect rhythm. Ruth's words echoed in his mind. The only man I ever trusted to see color and not run. The weight of her trust pressed heavy on his shoulders. These little ones needed more than a hermit's life could offer. They needed schooling, proper clothes, other children to play with. His gaze swept the cabin's rough-hewn walls, seeing it now through new eyes. This was no place to raise two young girls. As the first pale light of dawn crept through the window, Boaz began to move with purpose. He pulled out his old travel gear, checking straps and patches with careful fingers. His mule, Jenny, would need to be loaded just right. Too much weight on either side would make for slow going on the mountain paths. The girls stirred as he worked, their eyes widening at the sight of him packing. "We're leaving?" Ada's voice quavered, her hand instinctively finding her sister's. "Yes, little one," Boaz answered gently. "This mountain's too lonely for young'uns. We need to find you proper schooling and such." He helped them dress warmly, layering their thin dresses with his smallest wool shirts and an old coat he cut down to size. He fashioned mittens from rabbit fur, wrapping their tiny hands against the spring mountain cold. Their feet he wrapped in strips of soft leather before pulling on their mud-caked boots. The sun was barely over the ridge when Boaz led his horse Storm and Jenny the mule out of the lean-to. He'd converted an old pelt crate into a makeshift basket, lining it thick with furs and blankets. After securing it carefully to Jenny's broad back, he lifted the girls in, tucking the blankets around them. "It ain't exactly a fancy carriage," he said, checking the straps one final time, "but it'll keep you warm and safe on the trail." The descent from the ridge was slow going. Boaz led Storm and Jenny with careful steps, choosing each path with deliberation. The girls stayed quiet in their basket, though he caught them pointing at birds and whispering to each other when sunlight broke through the clouds. By midday, they reached a creek, its surface still touched with patches of ice. Boaz decided it was time to rest and eat. He helped the girls from their basket, watching as they stretched their legs with careful steps. "Let's get a proper fire going," he said, setting about gathering dry wood. "Reckon you both could use something hot in your bellies." While the girls stayed close to the fire, Boaz checked his snares. Fortune smiled on them. A plump rabbit had been caught in one of the traps. He cleaned it well away from the girls' sight, then returned to prepare a proper stew with dried vegetables from his supplies. As the stew bubbled and the day warmed, something remarkable happened. Addie pointed at a chipmunk scampering across a nearby log, and Ada giggled, a bright, clear sound that seemed to startle them both. Soon they were both laughing, sharing some private joke as sisters do. The sound wrapped around Boaz's heart like a warm blanket. He stirred the stew, pretending not to notice as they grew bolder in their play, chasing each other in small circles near the fire. "Is you our grandpa now?" Addie asked suddenly, stopping her play to look at him with serious eyes. Boaz stirred the stew slowly, choosing his words with care. "No," he said softly, meeting her gaze. "I'm just someone your mama believed in." That night, they made camp under the stars, wrapped warm in blankets beneath a canvas tent. The girls fell asleep quickly, but Boaz stayed awake long into the night, watching the fire and thinking about Ruth's trust in him. The next morning brought fresh snow, thick enough to delay their travel. Boaz used the time to tell the girls stories about their mother's bravery, careful to leave out the darker parts. They spent another night camped under canvas, the girls now comfortable enough to ask questions about the sounds they heard in the darkness. "That's just a whip poor will," Boaz would explain, or "That's an owl hunting his supper." Each answer seemed to ease their fears a little more. On the third day, they finally reached the edge of Whetstone Hollow. Boaz reined in Storm at the top of the last ridge, his heart pounding at the sight of smoke rising from chimneys in the valley below. 14 years had passed since he'd walked those streets. 14 years since he'd chosen the solitude of his mountain over the judgments and memories that lived in town. The girls sat up in their basket, eyes wide at the sight of actual houses and streets laid out below them. "Is that where we're going?" Ada asked, her voice barely a whisper. Boaz nodded, his throat tight. For these little ones, he would break his exile. For Ruth's daughters, he would face whatever whispers and sideways glances awaited him in Whetstone Hollow. The time for hiding in the mountains was over. "Yes," he said finally, gathering his courage. "That's where we're going." He clicked his tongue, urging Storm forward down the path that would lead them into town, into a future he'd never imagined for himself. The afternoon sun cast long shadows across Whetstone Hollow's main street as Boaz guided Storm and Jenny down the dusty road. Folks stopped in their tracks, conversations dying mid-sentence. Women drew their children closer and men stood watching with hard eyes. The whispers followed them like autumn leaves in the wind. Addie and Ada pressed against Boaz's legs, their small hands clutching his worn coat. He kept one weathered hand on each of their shoulders, guiding them forward with gentle pressure. Their boots, still wrapped in leather strips, made soft, shuffling sounds against the packed dirt. Martha Tooley's house stood at the edge of town, a neat, whitewashed building with herb gardens running along both sides. Dried plants hung from the porch rafters, their familiar scents, yarrow, sage, and sweetgrass, bringing memories flooding back. Boaz's throat tightened as he climbed the 3 wooden steps, the girls still clinging to him. Before he could knock, the door swung open. Martha Tooley stood in the doorway, her black hair streaked with silver and pulled back in a neat braid. Her dark eyes widened at the sight before her, taking in Boaz's graying beard, his trail-worn clothes, and the 2 small girls hiding behind his legs. "Good Lord above," she breathed. Then her expression softened like snow in spring sunshine. "Well, don't just stand there letting the flies in." She stepped back, gesturing them inside with a smooth sweep of her arm. "Come in, come in." The interior smelled of cornbread and dried herbs. Martha's home was just as Boaz remembered, neat as a pin, with smooth wooden floors and walls lined with shelves of medical supplies and books. A kettle sang softly on the wood stove. "Sit," Martha commanded, pulling out chairs at her kitchen table. "You all look half-starved." She moved with quick efficiency, setting out plates of cornbread, beans, and fresh apple preserves. The girls watched her every movement, their eyes growing wide at the sight of real china plates. "It's all right," Boaz murmured to them. "Miss Martha's a friend." He helped them into chairs, their feet dangling well above the floor. Martha poured cups of sweet milk for the girls and strong coffee for herself and Boaz. As the children ate, Boaz told the story, finding them at his cabin door, Ruth's letter, their journey down the mountain. His voice grew rough when he spoke Ruth's name. "Ruth Ellis," Martha said softly, shaking her head. "I remember her well. Strong hands, gentle touch. She helped me deliver half the babies in this region, Black and Cherokee both." She studied the girls' faces. "I see her in them plain as day." Addie and Ada had finished their food and were fighting to keep their eyes open. Martha showed them to a small bedroom off the kitchen, tucking them into a real bed with a patchwork quilt. They fell asleep almost instantly. Back in the kitchen, Martha's expression turned serious. "Ruth claimed land outside town, 20 acres near Sweetwater Creek. Had all the proper papers through the Freedmen's Bureau and Cherokee Nation both." She poured more coffee. "I keep birth records and land deeds for folks hereabouts. Give me a day or 2 to look through my files. Those girls might have more than just memories to their name." The sun was setting when another knock came at the door. Reverend Hosea Bell stood on the porch, his silver hair catching the last rays of daylight. His dark face was lined with years, but his back was straight as a pine tree. He removed his black hat as Martha opened the door. "Heard tell the girls made it to town," he said quietly. His eyes found Boaz across the room, and something old and painful passed between them. Martha ushered him inside. "They're sleeping now, but you can look in on them if you'd like." The Reverend moved to the bedroom door with careful steps. He stood there a long moment, one hand pressed against the doorframe. "They have Ruth's eyes," he murmured, his hands trembling slightly. After Martha bid them good night and retired to her room, Boaz and Hosea sat across from each other at the kitchen table. The lamp between them cast dancing shadows on the walls. Neither man spoke for a long while. 14 years, Hosea finally said, his deep voice barely above a whisper. 14 years since that night at the camp. Boaz's shoulders sagged. "Not a day goes by I don't think about it. You were a Union scout, sworn to protect." The words carried old pain, old anger. "I was wrong," Boaz said simply. Following orders or no, I was wrong. Those families trusted us, and we betrayed that trust. He looked up, meeting Hoseia's gaze. I've carried that shame every day since. Hoseia's hands clasped together on the table. I lost friends in that fire. Good people who'd made it all the way from Georgia on my underground line. Only two. He stopped, drawing a deep breath. I know, Boaz said softly. I know. The clock on Martha's wall ticked steadily as the two men sat in silence. Finally, Hoseia spoke again. Ruth forgave you. Must have to trust you with her girls. He shook his head slowly. Maybe it's time I did too. From the bedroom came a small whimper. Both men turned toward the sound. Addie stood in the doorway, her doll clutched tight against her chest. Bad dream, Boaz asked gently. She nodded, lower lip trembling. Hosea rose smoothly from his chair. Would you like to hear a story about your mama? He asked, his voice warm and kind. About how she used to sing so sweet it would make the birds stop to listen? Addie nodded again, more eagerly this time. Well then, Hosea said, leading her back to the bedroom. Let me tell you about that voice of hers. Boaz listened as Hosea's rich voice spun tales of Ruth's courage and kindness, of her healing hands and generous heart. Soon both girls were awake, drinking in stories of their mother. Their giggles drifted out to the kitchen where Boaz sat, his coffee gone cold and forgotten. The night grew deeper and the girls fell back asleep to the sound of Hosea humming an old spiritual. He returned to the kitchen, settling back into his chair. Those children need more than just stories, he said. They need a home, schooling, a future. I aim to see they get it, Boaz replied. Whatever it takes. Hosea nodded slowly. Then you'll have my help, and the church's. He stood, placing his hat back on his head. Martha's too, I reckon, though she was already on your side the moment you showed up at her door. He paused at the front door, looking back at Boaz. We can't change what happened back then, but maybe we can do right by these little ones now. Boaz watched through the window as Hosea's tall figure disappeared into the night. The weight of the past still sat heavy on his shoulders, but something else was there too now. Hope, as fragile and precious as the two small lives sleeping in the next room. The morning sun cast long shadows across Whetstone Hollow's dusty main street as Boaz and Martha made their way to the land office. The small wooden building sat between the general store and the telegraph office, its windows grimy with prairie dust. Inside, the air was thick with the musty smell of old papers. A thin clerk in a striped shirt looked up from his ledger, adjusting his wire-rimmed spectacles. His eyes darted between Boaz's weathered face and Martha's determined expression. We're here about Ruth Ellis's land claim, Martha said, her voice clear and firm. 20 acres on Sweetwater Creek. The clerk's fingers drummed nervously on his desk. Ah yes, the Ellis parcel. He shuffled through some papers, not quite meeting their eyes. I'm afraid that land was sold several months ago. Sold? Boaz's voice was quiet but sharp. To whom? The Wesley Pacific Railroad Syndicate acquired it through routine proceedings. The clerk's words came too quick, too practiced. Martha leaned forward, her hands flat on the desk. I'd like to see the sale documentation. I'm afraid those papers are not immediately available. The clerk tugged at his collar. It was all quite routine, you understand. Many such acquisitions happening these days. Routine? Martha's tone could have frozen water. Ruth Ellis was my friend. She would never have sold that land. It was meant for her girls. The clerk shrugged, a gesture that didn't quite hide his discomfort. Perhaps you should speak with Mr. Hall at the railroad office if you have concerns. Martha straightened up, smoothing her skirt. Perhaps we'll speak with Elijah Flint instead. The clerk's face paled slightly at the lawyer's name. Outside, Martha touched Boaz's arm. Elijah Flint handled many land cases for freedmen families. He'll know if something's not right here. Meanwhile, at the white-painted parsonage near the church, Reverend Bell sat in his study with the twins. Morning light streamed through the windows, warming the worn floorboards as he shared stories about their mother. "Your mama had a special way with people," he said, his deep voice gentle. When someone was hurting or scared, she knew just what to say to give them courage. Ada sat cross-legged on the floor, carefully arranging her one-eyed doll's dress. Addie perched on the edge of a chair, clutching their mother's Bible in her lap. "She used to sing to us," Ada said softly, "every night before bed." "That she did." Reverend Bell smiled. "Your mama's voice could lift spirits higher than church bells on Sunday morning." Addie's small fingers traced the Bible's worn leather cover. "Mama said there were important papers in here, for safekeeping." Reverend Bell leaned forward in his chair. "May I see?" Addie handed him the Bible carefully. The binding was loose, and as Bell examined it, he noticed stitching along the inside cover that didn't quite match the rest. With gentle fingers, he worked at the threads until they gave way. Folded carefully inside the Bible's cover was a sheet of paper, yellow with age but still crisp. Bell's hands trembled slightly as he unfolded it. "This is a land deed," he said, his voice hushed with discovery. "Properly filed and witnessed, it names you girls as the rightful heirs to your mama's 20 acres on Sweetwater Creek." The twins looked at each other, not quite understanding the document's importance but sensing it from the Reverend's tone. "Your mama was a smart woman," Bell said, carefully refolding the paper. "She made sure you'd be provided for." The day wore on, and as the sun began to set, the clip-clop of horses' hooves echoed down the street. 5 riders approached, their mounts kicking up dust in the golden evening light. At their head rode a man in an expensive suit, his hat tilted at a confident angle. From the church steps, Reverend Bell watched as the riders dismounted in front of the sheriff's office. The man in the suit, Merritt Hall of the Wesley Pacific Railroad, straightened his jacket before stepping inside. The other men, rough-looking types with guns on their hips, lounged against their saddles, eyeing the town like wolves sizing up a flock. Through the sheriff's office window, Bell could see Hall speaking with Sheriff Wade, their heads close together. Money changed hands. Not much, but enough to make the sheriff nod several times. Inside the parsonage, the twins were setting up for supper, carefully placing forks beside the plates just as Martha had shown them. They seemed younger than their 6 years as they concentrated on getting everything just right, their faces serious with the effort. Bell touched the deed paper in his pocket, thinking of Ruth's foresight in hiding it, of her faith that someone would help her girls when she no longer could. The sound of the railroad men's spurs jingling outside seemed to echo like a warning. A knock at the door made him turn. Martha stood there, Boaz just behind her, their faces grim with news from the land office. "Come in," Bell said, ushering them inside. "I believe we have something that might interest you." He drew the deed from his pocket. The girls' mama left them more than just memories. Martha's eyes lit up as she examined the document. "This is it. Official stamp and all. The land is legally theirs." Boaz watched through the window as Merritt Hall emerged from the sheriff's office, adjusting his silk tie with manicured hands. "Looks like we're not the only ones interested in that land." "Then we'd best make sure everything's properly filed," Martha said firmly. "First thing tomorrow, we're paying a visit to Elijah Flint." From the kitchen came the sound of the twins laughing as they set the table. The innocent sound a sharp contrast to the schemes being hatched in the growing dusk outside. The deed paper crackled softly as Martha folded it carefully, her movements precise and determined. They had proof now, proof of Ruth's claim and her daughter's inheritance. The question was, would it be enough? The evening sun painted the church steeple gold as shadows lengthened across the town. In the parsonage kitchen, the twins called everyone to supper, their voices bright with the simple joy of having a task to do, a place to belong. The adults exchanged glances, silently agreeing to keep their concerns from the children for now. There would be time enough for worry tomorrow. Morning sunlight glinted off the general store's windows as Boaz tied his horse to the hitching post. The wooden sidewalk creaked under his boots as he reached for the door handle. "Mr. McCrae," the voice was smooth as creek ice. "A moment of your time." Boaz turned to face Merritt Hall. The railroad man stood there in his fine suit, a gold watch chain gleaming across his vest. Two of his men lounged against the wall behind him, trying to look casual with their hands near their gun belts. "I believe we can help each other," Hall said, pulling an envelope from his jacket. "There's $500 here, more than fair compensation for taking on 2 orphans." Boaz's face hardened. "The girls aren't for sale. Come now." Hall's smile didn't reach his eyes. "We both know those children need more than a mountain hermit can provide. Think of their future. Proper schooling, fine dresses, the kind of life their mother would have wanted." "Their mother wanted them to have their land," Boaz said quietly. "Their heritage." Hall's expression cooled. "That land was legally acquired by the Wesley Pacific Railroad. We have plans. Progress that can't be delayed by sentimental attachments." "Seems to me," Boaz said, "if everything was legal, you wouldn't be offering bribes." The railroad man stepped closer, lowering his voice. "Consider carefully, Mr. McCrae. The frontier can be dangerous. Accidents happen. It would be a shame if anything befell those precious girls while in your care." Boaz's hands clenched, but he kept them at his sides. That sounded like a threat. "Just friendly advice." Hall adjusted his tie. "You have until tomorrow to reconsider. After that, well..." He shrugged. "Things might get complicated." Inside the store, Martha watched through the window, her fingers tight around a bolt of calico. When Hall and his men finally rode off, she hurried outside. "You all right?" she asked, touching Boaz's arm. He nodded, still staring after the riders. "We need that town meeting. Today." By late afternoon, Reverend Bell's church was packed. Farmers, shopkeepers, and ranchers filled the pews. Martha sat with the twins near the front, while Boaz stood at the pulpit, his weathered hands gripping the wooden edges. "Folks," Bell began, "we're here because 2 of God's children need our help. Their mother, Ruth Ellis, was known to many of you. She delivered some of your babies, tended your sick. Now her daughters need our protection." Boaz cleared his throat. The sound of his voice, unused to public speaking after so many years alone, caught roughly at first. 20 years ago, I did something unforgivable. I stood by while good people lost everything. I've carried that shame ever since." His words grew stronger. "But those girls found me. Their mama trusted me to make it right. I failed before. I won't again." A murmur ran through the congregation. Old Timothy Wheeler, who'd lost a leg in the war, spoke up. "Them railroad men been pushing folks around too long. Count me in." "And me," said Sarah Cooper from the Mercantile. "Those girls need proper clothes. I'll see to it." One by one, townspeople stood, offering what they could. Feed for horses, extra blankets, time standing watch. At the back of the church, a tall black man in a cavalry jacket rose. "Sergeant Clive Mathers, retired Buffalo soldier," he announced. "I'll take first watch tonight." Martha stepped forward then, her face grave. "Your support means everything. But we need to be clear. The girls' claim must be authenticated by federal marshals. That could take weeks." "Then we'll watch over them for weeks," Bell declared. "This is about more than land. It's about who we are as a community." As darkness fell, hope filled the town like lamplight. Families brought food to the parsonage. Children played with the twins in the churchyard. Even the sheriff looked uncomfortable when he rode past, avoiding everyone's eyes. Sergeant Mathers took up his post near the parsonage, rifle across his knees. Inside, Bell settled the girls into the spare room, their one-eyed doll propped against the pillow. "Sleep tight, little ones," he said, lighting a small lamp. "God's watching over you." "And Boaz too?" Addie asked sleepily. "Yes, child. Boaz too." The night was quiet at first. Too quiet, Martha would later say. The moon rose full and bright over the church steeple. Mathers paced his watch, boots soft in the dirt. In his room above the store, Boaz finally dozed in his chair, Ruth's letter clutched in his hand. The shattering of glass jolted everyone awake. Bell reached the girls' room first, Martha right behind him. The window gaped open, curtains billowing in the night wind. The bed was empty, covers thrown back. On the pillow lay a single sheet of paper, weighted down by a railroad spike. Martha's hands shook as she read the words, "This is railroad land now." Outside, Mathers was already mounting up, his dark face tight with anger. "Tracks in the dirt," he called. 4, maybe 5 riders, headed east. Boaz appeared, rifle in hand, his horse saddled. His eyes met Belle's across the yard. The preacher nodded once, understanding passing between them. "They won't hurt the girls," Martha said firmly. "They're too valuable as leverage." She gathered her skirts, practical as always. "I'll send word to the marshal in Helena, and to the Cherokee Nation Council." Belle clasped Boaz's shoulder. "Bring them home, brother. We'll be praying." The night wind carried the sound of hoofbeats as Boaz and Mathers rode out, following tracks illuminated by moonlight. Behind them, lamplight blazed in every window of Whetstone Hollow, the town standing vigil for 2 little girls who'd brought them together. In the parsonage, Martha and Belle gathered the twins' few possessions: the one-eyed doll, their mother's Bible, the precious deed. Belle's hands lingered on the small shoes by the bed. "Lord," he whispered, "watch over them all." The empty room seemed to echo with the absence of children's laughter, while outside, a coyote's lonely howl rose to meet the stars. Dawn had not yet touched the Montana sky when Boaz burst from the parsonage, his hands trembling as he checked his rifle and mounted his horse. Fear and rage warred in his chest, making it hard to breathe. The girls' empty bed haunted him, their small shoes still lined up neat and proper just as Ruth would have taught them. "Hold steady," Martha called from the porch, her voice carrying through the pre-dawn darkness. Inside, Reverend Bell paced the floorboards, his usual calm demeanor shattered. Martha went to him, placing firm hands on his shoulders. "Hosea," she said quietly, using his first name, "we need your strength now. Those girls need your prayers and your wisdom." The Reverend's shoulders straightened under her touch. "You're right, sister, you're right." He took a deep breath. "I'll send that telegram to Missoula straight away. The territorial marshal should know about this." Outside, Boaz dismounted briefly to study the ground in the pale light of his lantern. Boot prints marked the dirt clearly, 4 or 5 men moving east. One set of prints was deeper, likely carrying a child. His jaw clenched at the thought. Sergeant Mathers appeared on horseback, his cavalry training evident in his bearing. "I've got 6 men ready to ride," he reported. "Good men who know these hills." "Much obliged," Boaz nodded, swinging back into his saddle. "But I need to track alone first. Too many horses will muddy the trail." Martha emerged from her house carrying a leather medical bag. "Take this," she insisted, handing it up to him. "In case the girls are hurt. There's bandages, witch hazel, and my Cherokee remedies." The bag felt heavy with more than just supplies. It carried Martha's trust, her expertise, her connection to Ruth. Boaz secured it carefully to his saddle. "I've got more volunteers gathering at the church," Mathers added. "We'll organize search parties, coordinate with the sheriff if he'll help." "Sheriff won't help," Martha said sharply. "Saw him talking with Hall yesterday. He's bought and paid for." Boaz urged his horse forward, then paused. "If I'm not back by sundown, follow the eastern trail toward Serpent Canyon. That's old surveyor country." The sky was just beginning to pale when Boaz picked up the trail proper. He'd learned tracking from a Comanche scout during the war, how to read bent grass, displaced pebbles, the stories written in dust and dew. The kidnappers had tried to hide their path, but they'd been in a hurry. Around mid-morning, he found the first real sign, a tiny leather glove caught on a sagebrush branch. His heart clenched as he recognized it. Addie's, the Boulder twin. She'd dropped it deliberately, he realized. Smart girl. Ruth had raised them well. The trail led toward rougher country, where the foothills rose toward Serpent Canyon. Boaz knew the place. Railroad surveyors had used it as a base camp for years, plotting their iron path through tribal lands. As he approached, he left his horse hidden in a grove of aspens and continued on foot. The canyon opened before him, its red walls rising like ancient guardians. Through his field glasses, he spotted movement. 3 men on guard, rifles ready. Two more tended a fire, and there, in a makeshift lean-to, sat Addie and Ada. They were tied but sitting upright, sharing a blanket. His chest tightened seeing them huddled together, but they appeared unharmed. Merritt Hall paced nearby, his fine suit incongruous against the rugged landscape. He was agitated, gesturing as he spoke to his men. Boaz was too far to hear the words, but the meaning was clear. Things weren't going according to plan. The sun crossed the sky as Boaz watched, noting guard changes, counting weapons, memorizing the layout. When dusk finally painted the canyon walls purple, he began his careful retreat. The girls were safe for now. Hall needed them as leverage, but they wouldn't stay safe if he bungled the rescue. The moon was rising full and bright as he rode back into Whetstone Hollow. Lights blazed in every window, the town still very much awake. A small crowd gathered as he dismounted in front of the church. "Did you find them?" Martha pushed forward, her face tight with worry. "They're alive," Boaz assured her. "Unharmed. Hall's got them in Serpent Canyon, about 20 miles east. 5 armed men guarding them." Reverend Bell emerged from the church. "I got through to the marshal's office in Missoula. They're sending men, but it'll take at least 3 days for them to reach us." "3 days is too long," Sergeant Mathers said, stepping forward. "Those girls don't have 3 days." Boaz nodded grimly. "We need to get them out ourselves. But it has to be careful, has to be clean. No shooting if we can help it." "The girls have seen enough violence," Martha agreed softly. Inside the church, they gathered around the old communion table, now covered with a rough map Boaz had drawn in charcoal. He detailed everything he'd observed: guard positions, weapons, the girls' location. Mathers added his military expertise, suggesting approaches and timing. "We go in before dawn," Boaz concluded. "When men are tired, guards are drowsy. We'll need at least 8 riders, enough to show force without starting a war." "I've got the men," Mathers assured him, "already picked and ready." Martha spread her shawl over her shoulders. "I'm coming too. Those girls might need medical care." "Sister," Bell started to protest, but she cut him off. "I've ridden harder country than this, Reverend, and I knew their mother. I'm coming." As the others filed out to prepare, Bell caught Boaz's arm. "Brother," he said quietly, "I know we've had our differences. That fire 20 years ago, I blamed you for a long time." Boaz's face tightened with old pain. "You had reason. Maybe. But I see now what Ruth saw in you, a man trying to make things right. God goes with you tomorrow." Under the rising moon, Whetstone Hollow hummed with purpose. Horses were checked and rechecked, weapons cleaned, medical supplies gathered. And in the church, Reverend Bell kept vigil, his prayers rising like smoke into the Montana night. Tomorrow would bring what it would bring, but tonight they prepared, and somewhere in the darkness, 2 little girls huddled together, waiting for the man their mother had trusted to make things right. The morning air bit cold and sharp as Boaz stood before the gathered volunteers in Martha's yard. Dawn had barely broken, painting the Montana sky in watercolor streaks of pink and gold. 5 people had answered his call, each chosen carefully for their skills and steady nerves. Sergeant Mathers stood tall in his old cavalry coat, his dark face etched with determination. Beside him, young Jonah Two Rivers adjusted the leather strap of his medical bag, a gift from his apprenticeship with Martha. The Navajo scout's eyes missed nothing, scanning the horizon with practiced ease. Reverend Bell emerged from the house carrying his worn Bible, tucked safely in an oilskin wrap. 2 other men, Thomas Webb and Charlie Hawkins, both experienced ranchers, checked their horses' cinches one final time. "Listen close," Boaz said, his voice gravelly in the morning quiet. "We're going in smart. No guns unless they shoot first." He met each person's eyes in turn. "These are children we're after, not criminals we're hunting. I won't have bloodshed unless there's no choice." Mathers nodded approval. "Better to outsmart them than outshoot them." Martha appeared on her porch, arms laden with supplies: dried meat, hard biscuits, bandages, and coils of rope. "You'll need these," she said, passing them out. "And this too." She handed Boaz a small leather pouch filled with her Cherokee healing herbs: just in case. The horses stamped impatiently as the supplies were secured. The morning had warmed enough to start melting the frost, and steam rose from their flanks. Boaz swung into his saddle, feeling the familiar creak of leather beneath him. "Keep to the low ground," Jonah advised as they set out. "Less chance of being spotted that way." The young scout had learned the territory's secrets from both his Navajo elders and years of working with survey crews. His knowledge would prove invaluable. They rode east, following the winding creek beds where possible. The sun climbed higher, burning off the morning mist. Around midday, they stopped to rest the horses in a sheltered draw. That's when Boaz felt the weight of truth pressing on his chest, demanding to be spoken. He found Reverend Bell and Jonah sitting apart from the others, sharing a quiet meal of dried beef and cornbread. The words came slowly at first, like stones being pulled from deep water. "There's something you need to know," Boaz began, his voice rough with memory. "About Ruth. About why she trusted me." He settled heavily onto a fallen log. 20 years ago, during Reconstruction, I was a Union scout, had orders to clear disputed territories. His hands shook slightly as he spoke. There was a camp, Cherokee freedmen families trying to claim their promised land. Ruth's people. Bell's face remained carefully neutral, but his fingers tightened around his Bible. "They gave us orders to burn them out." Boaz's voice cracked. "Said they were squatting illegally. I helped set those fires. Watched people running into the night. Women, children." He looked down at his hands. "I got Ruth out, her and some others, but I still helped start those flames. Been carrying that sin ever since." Silence stretched between them, broken only by the soft nickering of horses and the whisper of wind through prairie grass. Finally, Reverend Bell spoke, his deep voice gentle but firm. "Then this is your altar, Boaz," he said, touching the older man's shoulder. "Time to make it right." Jonah nodded slowly. "My people have a saying. The path to healing begins when we face the source of our pain." They reached the canyon's edge as the sun began its descent, painting the red rock walls in deep crimson shadows. From their vantage point, they could see Hall's camp below, 5 men still guarding the girls who remained in the lean-to shelter. "They've got someone watching the main trail," Jonah reported after scouting ahead. "But there's an old game path down the north face, steep but manageable." They made camp well back from the rim, keeping their fire small and covered. As night settled over the canyon, Reverend Bell gathered them in a tight circle. "Let us pray," he whispered, his rich voice barely carrying beyond their group, "for wisdom, for protection, and for the innocent ones below." Heads bowed as Bell's prayer rose like smoke into the darkening sky. Even the horses seemed to sense the solemnity of the moment, standing quiet and still. When the prayer ended, Boaz felt a peculiar peace settle over him. Not the absence of fear, but the strength to face it. They took turns keeping watch through the night. Boaz found himself unable to sleep, watching the stars wheel overhead and thinking of Ruth's letter, still carried close to his heart. She had seen something in him worth trusting even after everything. He prayed he could prove worthy of that trust. As the night deepened, an owl called from somewhere in the darkness 3 times, then silence. Jonah lifted his head. "That's no owl," he whispered. "Someone else is out there." Mathers moved silently to the edge of their camp, peering into the darkness. After a long moment, he relaxed. "It's Martha," he reported. "Must have followed our trail." The Cherokee healer emerged from the shadows like a spirit, leading her horse. "Couldn't let you men have all the excitement," she said softly. "Besides, those girls might need a woman's touch when this is over." No one argued with her presence. They all knew Martha's strength, her healing skills, her connection to Ruth's memory. She settled among them, as if she'd been there all along. The hours crept by with agonizing slowness. Shortly before dawn, when the sky was still velvet black and the stars blazed overhead, Boaz gathered them one final time. "We go in quiet," he instructed. "Jonah and I will lead down the game trail. Mathers, you and your men circle around to the south. Be ready if they run that way. Reverend, you and Martha stay with the horses until we signal." If anything goes wrong, he paused, swallowing hard. If anything goes wrong, get word to the marshal. Those girls' rights need protecting no matter what. They checked their ropes one last time. Weapons were secured but left holstered. A last resort, not a first choice. As the first hint of dawn began to lighten the eastern sky, they moved into position. Boaz felt the weight of years lifting from his shoulders as they prepared to descend into the canyon. Here, finally, was a chance to balance the scales, not to erase the past, but to honor Ruth's faith in him, to protect what she had loved most in the world. He touched the letter in his shirt pocket once more, then nodded to his companions. It was time. As they began their careful descent into the canyon's shadows, Reverend Bell's words echoed in his mind. "This is your altar, Boaz. Time to make it right." The eastern sky had barely begun to pale when Boaz and Jonah crept through the shadows of the canyon. Their moccasins made no sound on the rocky ground. The camp lay quiet below them, with only one guard visible hunched near a dying fire. Boaz's heart thundered in his chest as they waited for Mather's signal. The plan was simple. The retired Buffalo Soldier and Reverend Bell would create a distraction near the ridge, drawing attention away from the lean-to where the girls were held. A screech owl's call pierced the pre-dawn stillness. 3 short bursts. The signal. Moments later, rocks clattered down the canyon's far wall, followed by shouts and movement. Just as planned, 3 of Hall's men scrambled toward the commotion, weapons drawn. "Now," Boaz whispered to Jonah. They slipped forward, staying low in the brush. The young Navajo scout moved like a shadow, checking their path was clear. The remaining guard had turned toward the noise, his back to them. The lean-to was a simple canvas structure hastily erected. Boaz's hands trembled as he reached the back wall. With painful slowness, he lifted the edge of the canvas. The girls lay curled together on blankets, their small hands bound with rope. "Addie, Ada?" he whispered, barely breathing the words. Ada's eyes flew open. A sob caught in her throat as she recognized him. Addie stirred beside her, then pressed her face into her sister's shoulder to muffle her cry of relief. "Shh," Boaz soothed, pulling out his knife to cut their bonds. "We're going home." The metallic click of a hammer being pulled back froze him in place. Cold sweat trickled down his spine as he slowly turned his head. One of Hall's men stood there, rifle aimed steady, but something was wrong in his stance. Hesitation showed in the way he held the weapon, in the troubled lines around his eyes. "Mister," Boaz said quietly, "these are children." The man's jaw worked. He looked at the twins, then back at Boaz. "I didn't sign up for this," he muttered. The rifle barrel lowered. "Taking land's one thing. Stealing kids." He shook his head. "Get them out of here." Boaz didn't waste the chance. He gathered both girls in his arms while Jonah kept watch. Ada clung to his neck, her tears dampening his collar. Addie was eerily quiet, but her small hands gripped his shirt with desperate strength. They slipped into the brush where it grew thick along the creek bed. The eastern sky had lightened enough to paint the canyon walls in shades of purple and gold. Dawn was coming fast. Too fast. A horse's sharp whinny split the air. Boaz's blood ran cold at the sound of hoofbeats approaching at a gallop. Merritt Hall's voice rang out, sharp with fury. "What do you mean they're gone?" "Sir, The guard who'd let them go never finished his sentence. "Find them!" Hall roared. $500 to the man who brings them back." Boaz clutched the girls tighter as horses thundered past their hiding place. Jonah pressed close, gesturing toward a narrow gap between 2 boulders. They squeezed through just as riders crashed through the brush they'd vacated. "This way," Jonah whispered, leading them along a nearly invisible game trail. The path twisted through stands of juniper and sage, staying close to the canyon wall where shadows still held. Ada whimpered when a branch scratched her cheek. Boaz wanted to comfort her, but there was no time. Behind them, Hall's men were spreading out, quartering the ground like hunting dogs after prey. A shot cracked out, the bullet winding off rock somewhere above their heads. Addie finally broke her silence with a terrified squeak. Boaz set the girls down, pushing them ahead of him. "Run to Jonah," he ordered softly. "Don't look back." The girls scrambled forward while Boaz turned to face their pursuers. He had no intention of shooting. The girls had seen enough violence, but he could buy them time. He drew his revolver, aiming high, and squeezed off 2 shots that sent Hall's men diving for cover. Ahead, Jonah was leading the twins up a steep wash, heading for where Mathers and the others waited with horses. Boaz backed away slowly, keeping his body between the girls and danger. More shots peppered the rocks around him. "McCrae!" Hall's voice echoed off the canyon walls. "You're stealing railroad property." "They're children, Hall," Boaz shouted back. "Not property." He turned and ran then, catching up to the others. The wash grew steeper, forcing them to scramble on hands and knees. Ada's breath came in frightened gasps. Without a word, Jonah scooped her up, while Boaz did the same for Addie. The sound of pursuit grew closer. Hall's men had dismounted, following them on foot now. The canyon walls pressed in, the wash narrowing until it seemed they'd be trapped. Then the path opened suddenly onto a wider shelf where Mathers waited with the horses. Martha was there too, reaching down to help pull the girls onto her mare. Reverend Bell held the reins of Boaz's horse, his dark face tight with concern. "Riders coming up the main trail too," Mathers reported tersely. "We need to move." They mounted quickly, Martha keeping the twins secure in front of her. Jonah swung up behind Mathers, and they urged their horses toward the ridge trail. Below, Hall's voice rang out again, closer now. "There they are. Don't let them reach the rim." Bullets kicked up dust around the horses' hooves. The animals snorted in fear but kept climbing. Boaz brought up the rear, watching for pursuit. His heart nearly stopped when he saw Hall himself emerge from the wash, rifle raised. But before the railroad man could aim, Reverend Bell's horse kicked up a shower of rocks that sent him stumbling back. The delay was enough. They crested the ridge just as the sun broke over the eastern horizon, painting their escape in gold. The morning sun cast long shadows across the ridge as hoofbeats thundered behind them. Boaz glanced back to see Hall and his men gaining ground, their horses' flanks lathered with sweat. Martha kept the twins pressed close, her mare picking its way carefully along the narrow trail while Mathers and Bell flanked her protectively. "There's a clearing ahead," Jonah called out, pointing to where the path widened near a steep ravine. "But it's a dead end." Boaz knew they couldn't outrun Hall's men forever. "Make for the clearing," he ordered. "We'll make our stand there." The group burst into the open space, pulling their horses up short at the ravine's edge. 100-foot drop yawned below, the bottom lost in morning mist. They wheeled their mounts around just as Hall and his men emerged from the tree line. "Spread out," Mathers commanded quietly. The townsfolk formed a line, their horses stamping nervously. Martha backed her mare away from the edge, shielding the girls with her body. Hall raised his hand and his men drew their weapons. The railroad agent's face was flushed with rage and exertion as he urged his horse forward. "You're only making this worse, McCrae," he snarled. "Those girls are on railroad land now. Their mother's claim is void." Boaz dismounted slowly, deliberately. His boots crunched on gravel as he walked forward, arms spread wide. He positioned himself between Hall's men and the twins, who watched with wide, frightened eyes. "They're children, Hall," Boaz said, his voice carrying across the clearing. "Flesh and blood, not property to be claimed." "The law says different," Hall sneered, pulling a folded paper from his coat. "I have the deed right here." The tension crackled like lightning before a storm. Behind Boaz, he heard the soft clicks of hammers being drawn back. His own hands stayed empty, spread wide in the morning light. "Last chance, McCrae," Hall warned. "Step aside or—" "United States Marshal!" a commanding voice rang out. "Everyone hold your positions." All heads turned as 2 riders emerged from the trees. The marshal's badge gleamed on the first man's chest as he guided his horse into the clearing, his deputy close behind. Both held rifles at the ready. "I received a telegram about kidnapped children and land fraud," the marshal announced, his stern gaze sweeping the scene. "Looks like we arrived just in time." Hall's face drained of color. "Marshal Davis, I can explain. These men are interfering with railroad business." "Save it, Hall." The marshal spurred his horse forward. "That deed in your hand? Show it to me." Reluctantly, Hall passed over the document. Marshal Davis examined it closely, then handed it to his deputy. Just as I suspected. This is the same paper style we found in that forgery ring in Missoula last month. He fixed Hall with a hard stare. The territorial governor's office is mighty interested in railroad agents using fake deeds to steal freedmen's land. These accusations are, Hall began, but the marshal cut him off. Everyone lower your weapons now. His tone left no room for argument. Slowly, guns were holstered on both sides. Deputy, collect their firearms. As the deputy moved among Hall's men, Marshal Davis turned to Boaz. I assume you have proof of the children's claim? Reverend Bell urged his horse forward, pulling out the Bible with Ruth's original deed. Right here, Marshal, properly filed and witnessed. The marshal reviewed the document and nodded. This appears genuine. We'll have it verified, but for now. He straightened in his saddle. Merritt Hall, you're under arrest for fraud, kidnapping, and conspiracy. Deputy, take him into custody. Hall's face twisted in fury as the deputy approached with handcuffs. His men, seeing their leader's fate, began to drift away, none wanting to share his charges. The twins clung to Martha as she brought her horse forward. Ada buried her face in the older woman's shawl, but Addie watched with solemn eyes as Hall was led away in chains. Boaz felt his legs go weak with relief. He stumbled slightly and Reverend Bell was there, gripping his arm. You did it, old friend, the preacher murmured. You made it right. The morning sun climbed higher, burning away the mist in the ravine below. The crisis had passed without a single shot fired. Justice prevailing through the arrival of the law rather than the barrel of a gun. The marshal's investigation moved swiftly over the next few days. In the town hall's main chamber, Marshal Davis sat behind a broad oak desk, carefully examining the deed sewn into Ruth's Bible. Morning light streamed through dusty windows as he compared the document against land office records. Everything appears to be in order, he announced, looking up at the gathered crowd. The original filing date, witness signatures, and territorial seal are all authentic. This deed grants full ownership of the Ellis homestead to Addie and Ada as their mother's rightful heirs. Martha Tooley squeezed the girls' hands as they stood beside her, dressed in fresh calico dresses she had sewn. Addie stood straight and proud, while Ada leaned shyly against Martha's skirts. The town council convened that afternoon in the same chamber. Mayor Thompson, a weather-beaten man with kind eyes, called the meeting to order with 3 sharp raps of his gavel. The matter before us today concerns the future of the Ellis homestead and its rightful heirs. Councilman Jenkins, the general store owner, stood first. I move that we establish the land as community property, held in trust for the girls until they come of age. We can help rebuild what was lost. Seconded, called out Sarah Miller, the school teacher. These children are part of our community now. We protect our own. The vote was unanimous. Even old Mr. Peterson, known for his frugal ways, raised his hand in support. After the council meeting, Martha and Reverend Bell huddled at a corner table in the church hall, drafting plans for the girls' future. Martha's quill scratched across paper as she calculated figures. We'll need school books, winter clothes, and proper beds, she murmured, and funds set aside for their education later on. Reverend Bell nodded, adding his own notes. I'll speak to the congregation about establishing an education fund. These girls have bright minds. They should have every opportunity to use them. As evening approached, Marshal Davis called Boaz into his temporary office. The grizzled mountain man shifted uncomfortably in his chair as the marshal laid out guardianship papers. The girls need a legal guardian, the marshal explained gently. Someone to protect their interests and raise them proper. Their mother's letter named you, Mr. McCrae. Are you willing to accept that responsibility? Boaz stared at the papers, his weathered hands trembling slightly. I'm not sure I'm fit for it, he whispered. Been alone so long. Sometimes the best parents are the ones who doubt themselves most, the marshal replied. Those girls already trust you. That's worth something. Boaz picked up the pen, his eyes misting as he signed his name. I'll do right by them, he promised. For Ruth's sake, for their sake. That evening, the church hall glowed with lamplight as the town gathered to celebrate. Ladies from the quilting circle had decorated the walls with fresh pine boughs and paper chains. The long tables groaned with covered dishes, Martha's cornbread, Mrs. Miller's apple pies, and enough fried chicken to feed twice their number. Addie and Ada sat beside Boaz at the head table, their eyes wide at the festivity. Reverend Bell stood to offer grace, his deep voice carrying to every corner. "Lord, we thank you for bringing these precious children to our care," he prayed. "Guide us as we help them grow. Make us worthy of the trust placed in us." Martha announced the education fund to enthusiastic applause. Already, several families had pledged support. Even the telegraph operator offered free lessons in his spare time. As twilight deepened outside, Boaz watched the twins playing with other children near the punch bowl. Ada had emerged from her shell enough to join a game of cat's cradle, while Addie taught the others a clapping game Ruth had shown them. Reverend Bell settled into the chair beside him. "You've done a mighty thing, Boaz," he said quietly, "taking these girls in, helping us all remember what community means." Boaz nodded, his throat tight with emotion. Around him the hall hummed with conversation and laughter, the sounds of a town united in purpose. He realized that in saving the girls, he had found his own way home. Spring melted into early summer across Whetstone Hollow. The wildflowers dotted the meadows with splashes of purple and gold, and warm breezes carried the scent of pine from the ridgeline. In a modest cabin just outside town, new life was taking root. Boaz stood before a clouded mirror, dragging a straight razor carefully across his graying beard. Soap foam collected in the wash basin as years of wilderness fell away, revealing a face he had almost forgotten. From the kitchen, he could hear the twins giggling as they prepared breakfast, a sound that still surprised him each morning. "You look different," Ada said softly when he emerged, running her small fingers over his newly smooth chin. Her sister Addie nodded in agreement, setting 3 tin plates on the rough-hewn table. "Reckon I do at that," Boaz replied, touching his face self-consciously. The morning sun streamed through windows that had been carefully washed and hung with gingham curtains Martha had helped the girls sew. Days settled into a gentle rhythm. 3 mornings each week, Boaz would watch the twins skip down the dirt path to Martha's schoolhouse, their slates tucked under their arms and lunch pails swinging. While they learned their letters and numbers, he worked to repair the sagging fence lines around their property, his hands remembering skills long unused. On other days, he taught the girls the ways of the land. At the creek that wound behind their cabin, Boaz showed them how to read the water's patterns and where fish liked to hide. "See how the current breaks there?" he would explain, pointing to a fallen log. "That's where the big ones rest." Addie proved a natural with a fishing pole, while Ada preferred to sit on the bank and draw pictures in her slate of the butterflies that danced above the water. Both girls soaked up his knowledge like parched earth and rain. When Martha gifted them 2 gentle ponies, Boaz spent patient hours teaching the twins to ride. He fashioned special stirrups to fit their small boots and showed them how to guide their mounts with quiet confidence. "A horse can feel your fear," he explained, helping Ada settle into her saddle. "Trust yourself, and they'll trust you back." But nights remained harder. The darkness often brought back memories that no amount of new happiness could fully wash away. Boaz would wake in his bedroll, heart pounding, his skin clammy with sweat as phantom flames danced behind his eyes. The old guilt would rise up like smoke, choking him with remembered screams and the acrid smell of burning canvas. One such night, as he sat rigid in the darkness trying to slow his breathing, tiny footsteps padded across the wooden floor. Addie, her hair in sleep-mussed braids, appeared like a small ghost in her white nightgown. Without a word, she crawled into his bedroll and pressed her warm body against his side. Her presence anchored him to the present, drawing him back from the edge of old terrors. "You don't have to be afraid anymore, Papa," she whispered, her small hand finding his larger one in the darkness. "We're here now." Boaz's throat tightened at the word, Papa. He had never asked them to call him that, had never presumed to take Ruth's place in their hearts. But in that moment, as Addie's steady breathing slowed into sleep beside him, he felt something shift and settle in his soul. The past couldn't be undone, but perhaps it could be balanced by love freely given. He didn't correct her. Instead, he pulled the blanket more securely around her shoulders and let his own eyes close, the nightmare's grip loosening its hold. For the first time in years, he slept until dawn. Spring burst into full glory across Whetstone Hollow, painting the valley in vibrant hues. Apple trees dotted the hillsides with clouds of pink and white blossoms, while meadowlarks trilled their morning songs from fence posts. The air carried the sweet perfume of new growth and possibility. At the town hall, Mayor Harrison stood before the gathered townspeople, holding an official-looking letter bearing the Wesley Pacific Railroad's elaborate letterhead. The investigation into Merritt Hall's activities had revealed a web of corruption stretching across 3 territories. Now the company sought to make amends. To the good people of Whetstone Hollow, the mayor read, his voice carrying to the back of the crowded room. We extend our deepest apologies for the unconscionable actions taken by our former agent, Merritt Hall. His attempts to illegally seize land and endanger children represent everything our company stands against. Martha Tooley sat in her usual spot near the front, nodding with quiet satisfaction as the letter detailed the company's commitment to compensating affected landowners. Beside her, Reverend Bell smiled knowingly. Justice had prevailed even if it had taken its time arriving. When the question of the railroad's proposed route through the valley came to vote, the townspeople's decision was clear and unanimous. The new tracks would run east of their community, preserving both their peace and their independence. The vote wasn't against progress, Martha later explained to the twins, but for protecting what mattered most. Outside of town, on Ruth's reclaimed land, Boaz McCrae worked from sunrise to sunset, his hands deep in the rich soil. He had declined several offers to join the town council, preferring instead to focus on bringing Ruth's old garden back to life. The leather-bound planting journal he'd found in her trunk became his guide, its pages filled with careful notes about soil and seasons, about which flowers needed morning sun and which vegetables thrived in shade. Your mama knew every inch of this land, he told Addie and Ada as they helped him clear winter-dead vines from the fence. She wrote down everything she learned, just like you do in your school tablets. The girls took to gardening with the same enthusiasm they showed for riding and fishing. They delighted in discovering their mother's handwriting in the journal's margins. Little notes about which flowers attracted butterflies or how to tell when corn was ready for picking. Each page revealed another piece of the mother they were too young to fully remember. One warm afternoon, Martha rode out to check on their progress. She found Boaz kneeling beside a freshly turned flower bed, carefully setting out young rose bushes. The twins were nearby, giggling as they watered the newly planted vegetables with small tin cans. Martha noticed the tears tracking silently down Boaz's weathered cheeks as he worked. He didn't try to hide them when she approached, just wiped his hands on his pants and gestured at the flourishing garden around them. She loved this place, he said softly, his voice rough with emotion. Every word in that journal shows it. The way she wrote about the soil, the seasons, the hope of things growing. He touched a rosebud gently. And now they will too. These girls of hers, they'll know her through every flower that blooms here. Martha rested her hand on his shoulder, understanding the weight of the moment. The garden wasn't just about growing food or flowers. It was about keeping Ruth's memory alive for her daughters. Each plant they tended was a connection to their mother's dreams, each harvest a fulfillment of her plans for this piece of earth. She watched as the twins ran over to show Boaz the first tiny sprouts breaking through in their vegetable patch, their faces glowing with pride and excitement. The land was coming back to life under their care, just as Ruth had always intended. The Montana evening painted the sky in brush strokes of purple and gold as Boaz McCrae settled into the old wooden rocker on the cabin's front porch. Addie and Ada nestled against him, one on each knee, wrapped in the patchwork quilt Martha had made them. The gentle creaking of the chair mingled with evening birdsong and the distant lowing of cattle in the valley below. Fireflies began to dance in the growing darkness, sparking wonder in the girls' eyes. Addie reached out, trying to catch one in her small palm. The warm summer air carried the sweet scent of Ruth's roses, now blooming in abundance along the garden path. Mr. Boaz? Addie's voice was soft, thoughtful. She had taken to calling him that instead of just Boaz, a small change that touched his heart every time. "Yes, darling? Are we gonna stay here forever?" The question hung in the twilight air, weighted with all the uncertainty these young ones had already known. Boaz's arms tightened protectively around them both as he rocked slowly back and forth. "As long as the Lord allows, my darlings," he answered, his voice rough with emotion. "As long as he allows." Ada snuggled closer, her small hand clutching his worn shirt. The peace of the moment wrapped around them like a blessing, until the sound of approaching hoofbeats drew their attention to the path. Reverend Hosea Bell appeared through the gathering dusk, his silver hair catching the last rays of sunlight. He dismounted with the ease of a much younger man, his face bright with news he couldn't wait to share. "Evening, Brother Boaz," he called, climbing the porch steps. The girls scrambled down to hug his legs, making him chuckle. "And good evening to you too, little ladies." Boaz gestured to the empty chair beside him. "What brings you out this way, Reverend?" The older man settled into the chair, reaching into his coat pocket. "Got word from the town council today. They've voted to add Ruth's name to the founding plaque, right where it belongs, among the first settlers of this valley." Boaz's breath caught in his throat. He watched the girls' faces light up at the mention of their mother's name. "There's more," Bell continued, his voice warm with satisfaction. "The council's approved plans for a new school, right here on Ruth's land. A proper schoolhouse, dedicated to educating both freedmen and Cherokee children together, just as she always dreamed." Tears welled in Boaz's eyes as he remembered Ruth's passionate belief in education, her determination that her people's children would have the learning she'd been denied. Now her dream would become reality, right here on the soil she'd loved so well. Later that night, after Reverend Bell had ridden home, Boaz sat between the girls' beds with Ruth's Bible open on his lap. The lamplight cast a gentle glow as he read from the Psalms, Ruth's favorite passages marked with pressed flowers she'd collected years ago. As sleep began to claim them, Ada's voice drifted up, soft and clear in the quiet room. "You're our papa now." The words pierced straight to Boaz's heart. Tears slipped into his graying beard as he looked at these precious souls entrusted to his care. He reached out to smooth Ada's hair, then Addie's, his touch gentle as a prayer. "No, sweet pea," he whispered, his voice thick with emotion. "I'm just the man God sent to keep you safe till you find your way home." But looking at their peaceful faces, Boaz knew the truth that had been growing in his heart since that stormy night when they first knocked on his door. They had already found their way home, and so had he. In saving these children, he had found his own salvation, his own path to forgiveness and grace. Thank you for listening. Stories connect us in the most unexpected ways. If you felt that spark today, make sure you're subscribed. I share a new one daily, and the next might change your day.